Welcome to episode 513 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and I have the pleasure of welcoming back to the show after way too long, Zach Lowy from Breaking the Lines. We're talking to Portuguese football today, so welcome back to the show.
Yeah, it's great to be back. I'm doing very well, and yeah, like you said, I've been producing a lot of good stuff on Breaking the Lines, my website and my Twitter account. So we're producing some fantastic articles that you definitely should be checking out, and including some stuff related to Barcelona. And I have a feeling it's going to be a matter of time before we get an article on the new revelations of this season, whether that's Lamine Yamal, Fermin Lopez, some very exciting storylines for Barcelona. But yeah, we're covering just about every single angle of football with Breaking the Lines. So definitely stay tuned for that.
Yeah, I can't think of a better person, though, to preview this Barcelona versus Porto Champions League matchup. So let's dive right in. And you're going to be the Porto expert here, of course. And it does feel like it's a Champions League, sure, but this might be the biggest match for Barcelona in the Champions League group stage. Same thing for Porto. It's for Barcelona on the road against FC Porto in Portugal. So actually, I think before we even go over the team stuff and the formations and recent form and all that, let's dive into the most confusing and most difficult part. So I feel like people love when you really confuse them and twist them around beforehand, and then you get into the more easier stuff. So let's dive into the players that we'll probably see. Then we can go over the tactics and the recent matches and the like and things like that. So to me, I could pretty much put 6 starters down in pen from this Porto team from what I've seen this season without even knowing the formation. So um, the manager in Sérgio Conceição has gone from a 4-4-2 and a 4-2-3-1, but very much like Xavi, when you say the formation has changed or they're opting in for a different thing, the ideas are very much the same. The passages of play seem to be very much the same, regardless of the formation he goes with. And the 6 starters I have are Mehdi Taremi, Steven Eustáquio, and Alan Varela as the deeper central midfielders, and then Galeno on the left wing rather, and João Mario at right back, and then Diego Costa in goal. So those are the 6 I pretty much have in pen or marker in this starting lineup. They seem to all be healthy and the like. Zaidu, the left back, is injured, so I think we can probably also slot in Wendell at left back, almost a guarantee there, unless Zaidu gets healthy real quickly. Then you got a bunch of injuries where we don't really know the timelines for, including the old Barcelona friend of Pepe, that being the center back, the one everybody knows that I love so much. And then the Brazilian wonderkind from Palmeiras a few years ago, Gabriel Veron. He's now a 21-year-old, just okay prospect. But the big name up top, the Brazilian name you'd really need to know is Emilson, who looks like he's going to miss out due to an ankle injury. Hasn't really been able to feature this year too much, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other options, though. This Porto team, pretty deep in players. The manager at least trusts a little. He does use a lot of players, though. The left winger, Pepe, the right winger, Cancelo Borges, who came up from the B team, the center forward, Tony Martinez, the attacking midfielder, Andre Franco, the center forward, Fran Navarro, Nico Gonzalez. We'll talk about him in a second, though. Barcelona player, the attacking midfielder, Ivan Wame, and the old UEFA Youth League darling, now 23-year-old Romario Barro. So that's a lot of options for a few spots. So I am going to put you on the spot pretty early on here. And of course, with those, again, injuries, it's the Monday, so we don't actually know if Pepe, that being the center back Pepe, is healthy or anything like that. But yeah, who would you bet would be starting in this game for Porto?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a tough one. As you mentioned, there are a few players who are amongst the first names on the team sheet, but I think that Porto, they've gone with a few different formations. In fact, they even went with a 3-man back line against Estrela da Amadora. But given the fact that Ivan Marcano is out for the next few months, I believe, and I'm not really sure what the deal with Pepe is. I would definitely expect it to be 4-2-3-1, probably. He's gone with a 4-4-2 and a 4-3-3 at times. But yeah, I think that it's probably going to be Diogo Costa in goal for me, one of the best goalkeepers in all of European football. Then, you'd have João Mario at right back. I really don't know what's going to be the deal with the center backs because, yeah, Pepe, as much of a legend as he is, he's 40 years old and just becoming increasingly injury prone. missed out on a really big game on Friday against Benfica. I'm not sure. I know that he'll do everything it takes to make the game against Barcelona, but I just don't know if he'll be able to make it. So in the case that he's not available, it would probably be Fabio Cardoso, who got an early red card on Friday in the 1-0 loss to Benfica. And yeah, probably going with Cardoso and Carmo. I know that he subbed on Zé Pedro for his professional debut, but I don't think there's any reason for him to not go with Cardoso. I thought that red card was particularly harsh, so I don't think that he would be punishing him. But I think left back, yeah, Wendell has definitely made that position his own over Zaidu Sanusi. I thought for me he was definitely one of their best players against Benfica. Really strong in physical duels, really confident going forward with the ball. Player who I've been critical of because of the fantastic caliber of left backs that Porto have had from players like Alexandro, Alex Tejas, Miguel Layun. But I think that he definitely showed up against Benfica. As far as midfield and attack goes, I guess that's where most of my doubts are because Porto have lost quite a few key players. They lost Mateus Uribe, this Colombian veteran who was the defensive midfield linchpin and allowed players like Steven Eustáquio, Otavio, and Galeno to go forward and have more freedom on the ball. But obviously he's a big loss. But they went and got Alan Varela from Boca Juniors. So I definitely expect Varela to be starting in the double pivot alongside Steven Eustáquio. And so yeah, I would probably expect a 4-2-3-1. I'm just not sure like what else is going to happen because Romario Barro, a player who has had a few loan spells at Casapia and Estoril, some mid-table sides, and hasn't really been able to come close to the promise that he showed at the youth level for Porto. Was a huge surprise when he was selected for the game against Benfica, and I wasn't able to see much of him because Benfica were kind of in they were kind of having one-way traffic, and after 22 minutes, Cardoso got sent off, and unfortunately for Bardo, you can't play against Benfica with just one center back, so he was substituted off for Zé Pedro. I don't know if Barro gets to start again. I feel like it'll probably be Andre Franco or maybe even Ivan Jaime. I know that Jaime is obviously Spanish. I was very surprised to see Jaime not in the lineup because it was just a few months ago that he was named the best young talent in the Primera. For me, a very good player who I think has what it takes to fill Otavio's void. But obviously, Otavio, that's another talking point. For me, the most indispensable player in Portugal over the past 2 years or so. Just what he brings to the table in terms of his defensive work rate, in terms of his creativity, his ability to just break down deep blocks, so necessary. So honestly, I mean, as somebody who's pretty much watched every Porto game this season, I think, I mean, obviously they have had a very good start to the season in terms of points, but I really think that the performances have been lacking. Like if you watch a 90-minute performance of Porto, you'll think to yourself, if it wasn't for Diogo Costa, this team might be in fourth or fifth because they're just not really stringing together passes. I do think that Porto, one thing that they've been really good on under Sérgio Conceição is like fighting adversity. We've seen it in the Champions
Mm.
League so many times over his 6-7 years in charge, where Porto they'll go down to 10 men or they'll be playing at Juventus or a European powerhouse, and they'll be able to dig deep, soak up pressure, and hit on the counter. And we saw that from Porto, to be fair. I mean, they produced a very good performance that, for me, deserved at least a point against Benfica. I think that they were very good in terms of in terms of not giving up after that red card and continuing the pressure. They had actually a very solid performance in my opinion. But yeah, they're a team that is a team that is very good at digging in, at soaking up pressure, and finding the right moment to pounce. And another thing, if you look at their matches from this season, so many of them have been, late results. We saw that, against that Alca where they scored in like the 90s, or in like the 19th minute of extra time or something to secure a draw. We've seen so many late winners this season. It's been ridiculous. But that's what Porto does, right? They know how to get results without playing very well. But yeah, I do think that a part of that is Otavio, just in terms of how reliant they were on him.
That's what I want to hit next, Otavio for sure. And then because you've gone over so many things and hit so many matches, so I want to kind of pick out more
Yeah.
detail from all the things that you've said now. And so I do want to start with almost the summertime, right? Because in the window they parted with Otavio, as you mentioned, for 60 mil at the age of 28. So you could argue still very much in his prime. Diego Lete, the center back, also goes to Union Berlin for 7.5 mil. But otherwise, the team, as you mentioned, is largely still intact with, a few pieces here or there, the veteran midfielder. But as you mentioned, those key pieces like Ivan Jaime comes in, Nico Gonzalez, Varela as a player who Kool-Aids are familiar with because I thought looking at some of his stuff, I watched 2 of his games for Boca Juniors, and I was like, okay, this kid is certainly should be on the radar to be a quote unquote Sergio Busquets replacement. But Porto kind of felt like that might have been his level. And then you mentioned Navarro too. All of those players added, as well as Francisco Conceição, and Jorge Sanchez from Ajax, which are 2 loans that don't look to be working out very well, even though those players came in with a bit of fanfare. But back to the Otavio point, I can't think of Porto, honestly. I can't think of Porto from the last few years without thinking of Otavio. I know he hasn't. There's a stretch there where I can tell you in the maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago when I wasn't really familiar with them. So I think from my Porto understanding is Jackson Martinez era, 10 years ago or such. And then, yeah, maybe I took a few years off there. And then it's me seeing them led by Otavio, him kind of being the guy. But I get the price too. As a piece of business, 60 million to Saudi Arabia for a 28-year-old, you take that deal. But as you said, do you think Porto this season is missing him and still kind of adapting without him?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that any team in Portugal would miss a player of Otavio's caliber. And yeah, with regards to Otavio, this summer he had a release clause that started at the start of the window and that ended in July on July 15th. That was just 40 million. And after the clause expired, he said he tweeted, you're gonna have to deal with me for another year. Like, let's go Porto. So everybody was under the
Mm.
impression that he was going to stay, and until Al Nasser, Cristiano Ronaldo's club, decides to make an offer for his current release clause, which was 60 million, which wasn't just 60 million for Porto because they had to divide it with a bunch of other stuff, and splitting the bill and whatnot. But I think that Otavio, he's just such a massive loss in terms of his vision, in terms of his leadership, so many things. And yeah, at 28 or so, he's got that veteran experience. So that's something that's obviously going to take time for a young player like Romario Baró, Ivan Jaime, or Andre Franco to fill that void. And I think that's got to be the biggest question mark going into this game. But yeah, it goes without saying that Otavio, he's just a massive loss. Obviously, losing Uribe in midfield is pretty significant. I think that Alan Varela is going to grow into that spot. But I think that, yeah, Otavio, it's just so hard to find somebody who comes close to checking all the boxes like Otavio does.
Yeah, so let me jump in there. You mentioned Mehdi Taremi, the center forward, and Galeno on the left wing. Looking at the Shakhtar Donetsk result, a 3-1 win, a 15-minute brace from Galeno, which was very opportunistic, just kind of taking advantage of Shakhtar Donetsk's mistakes to go up 2-1, and then Mehdi Taremi putting the game away. Galeno also Galeno creating that from the left wing. easy cross in, Taremi in the right place. Striker's goal, 29th minute. So this match, that being the one between Barcelona and Porto, obviously I've said it feels like it's for first in the group. So the two things there about Taremi and Galeno really being the two driving forces of this attack so far this year. And I don't know, when you watch that again, the Shakhtar Donetsk game, it did feel like Porto more took advantage of their opportunities and kind of took the game for themselves. And do you think that they were just a class above Shakhtar Donetsk? And to that regard, I mean, I think to focus on Taremi and Galeno, those being the two attackers that Barca needs to focus on, as we've talked about the issues with the right wing without Otavio, and them kind of still figuring that out. So, I mean, what do you think that also in terms of, again, not just Shakhtar Donetsk, but throughout the season, what do you think that Taremi and Galeno have brought to the table that Kool-Aids will need to be watching out for?
Yeah, well, look, I think that with regards to the attack, it's not just Taremi and Galeno, but also Pepe. I know that he wasn't available. He didn't play against Shakhtar, but he was struggling with some injury. But he's a tremendous player who's been utilized at fullback as well as winger. But he's definitely a natural winger and so good at changing direction and utilizing his speed. So I think that he's going to be a problem as well. I think that's going to be Pepe, Galeno, and Taremi up top. Yeah, with regards to Taremi, obviously he's been, the best striker in Portugal for the past 3-4 years. Joining from on the back of Rio Ave when he finished joint top scorer in his first season in Europe, and then producing some very high caliber seasons for Porto, leading them to the title, and then finishing top scorer last season. I do think that there's been some question marks from Porto fans, like, is he a player who's in decline? Should we have sold him this past summer, but when his contract's going to expire in 2024? But when he's on his day, he just offers so much in terms of his hold-up play, his ability to get into goal-scoring positions. Everybody criticizes him for being a diver and going down easily. But to be fair, he does get into those positions where defenders may get a little nervous and may decide to foul him in the box. So he's just a very tough player to deal with. I think with regards to Galeno, definitely kind of like a hot and cold player, but he's a player who I think is becoming gradually more hot than he is cold. He's a player who, came to Porto from Brazil at an early age, didn't really get much game time, went to Braga, did very well there, and was even being utilized as a wing back. So I think that Galeno, he's a player who definitely thrives in big matches where there's a lot of space available, because he's a tireless player who is constantly getting forward and pushing forward with the ball. I do think that if his decision making was a little better, he'd probably be in a much bigger club like a Premier League side. Because yes, there are games where he'll just be absolutely unstoppable, as we saw against Shakhtar, where he actually should have had a hat trick, but a Shakhtar player, he was on the counter, and the Shakhtar player pulled up with a hamstring, and instead of going for the hat trick, he decided to kick the ball out of play, which I thought was a very nice touch of class. But I think that he's a player who, like I said, just a bit hot and cold, but when he's on his day, he can be just lethal in terms of bringing down a long ball with his first touch, cutting inside, and he loves to have a shot on goal. He's not necessarily reticent towards playing Taremi or someone else with a through ball, but I think that he's a player who's just so effective at cutting in and threatening from long range. The thing about Porto, which is a bit interesting, is they do have a lot of very good strikers, but you still get the sensation that Porto are going to approach this with a one striker team. But I do think that they have a lot of potential game changers from the attack. Evan Nielsen was absolutely massive in their title winning campaign. Really came kind of got knocked down to earth last season with a lot of injuries and inconsistencies, and I think that he's going to have to work to get his way back into the lineup, because right now he's just kind of he's kind of on the decline, if you will, in terms of his form. Fran Navarro, a player who was absolutely magnificent for Gil Vicente, another Spanish striker who I think got 33 goals across 2 league seasons for Gil, which is just unheard of for a mid-table team like that. I've been a bit surprised that he hasn't had more opportunities, but I think he's a fantastic player. Tony Martinez, another very good battering ram, kind of a player who's very effective at in aerial duels, and he's just been a very good super sub for Porto. And as well as Dani Namaso Loader, a player who I'm very incredulous has not had more minutes, because I think he's a brilliant forward. And for me, the best possible Taremi replacement. So I think that Conceição, he's going to trust with Taremi, because obviously he's been leading the line for quite some time. But I do think that there are some players who could come on against tired legs and potentially cause this Barcelona defense some issues. I know that last season they had the best defense in Europe, but I've caught a few games of Barcelona this season, and I'll be honest, they've looked kind of all over the place defensively. So I think that Barcelona, they will definitely be the favorites. Like I said, I still think that Porto, they aren't necessarily what I call early risers. Like, that hasn't been the case for the past few years. Even with their title winning campaign, where they got a Portuguese league record 91 points and won the Taça de Portugal, they still took a long time to get it together, to figure out what kind of team they want to be. And it actually wasn't until January, after they sold Luis Diaz, that they were able to just step it up and start playing some really good football. So they're a team that can take some time to get adjusted, especially after losing, key players like Uribe and Otavio. But this is still the best Portuguese team when it comes to Champions League performances. Porto, they're not a team that goes lightly, and I think that they are going to be able to get out of this group.
Yeah, I think they are favorites. Second, having watched Royal Antwerp, but then seeing what they did against Shakhtar already, taking care of business. So we already did kind of go over the last match that they played, that being a 1-0 loss to rivals Benfica, down to 10 men after that early red card. They survived until the 68th minute, until Angel Di Maria, who else scores the winner, putting them on 16 points, that being Porto, Benfica on 18, and Sporting CP at the top table with 19, albeit having not played the other two yet. And you mentioned that you think that obviously from Friday to Wednesday, that's a lot of time to kind of regroup, figure things out. And you mentioned the big player for that would be Diego Costa, the 24-year-old goalkeeper. And already, I was going to ask you, talking about it, a top goalkeeper, how soon are we going to be doing that already? And you've already given your opinion there. So I want to pivot a little bit, a few more questions here on Porto, then we'll do Barca to end the show here. So Sérgio Conceição, how much is he a manager that both Porto fans and that you trust? Like, do you think, again, he's somebody that is more of a, and I think a lot of times in modern football, we kind of put these managers in two different camps. There's like the man managers, right? Where you say Ancelotti is one of the best who does that. And then there's like the tactics managers, like the Zarbi from Brighton, where you really put them in those two different camps. So I would ask, how much is Porto fans kind of buy into what he's doing, and how much is the team kind of, rah-rah behind him, or is he really the X and O kind of guy that the club is saying, hey, this is your project and do what you want with it?
I would probably lean towards the first one. I do think that Conceição doesn't get enough credit for his tactics, because to do what he's been able to do, coming to a Portuguese football landscape that was dominated by Benfica, right? A Benfica team that had won 4 in a row, and to get Porto 3 league titles since then. It's just incredible. what he's been able to accomplish, not just domestically but also in Europe. But I think that he's definitely a player. He's definitely a manager who, yeah, he's a bit like a drill sergeant in the army, just getting everybody to fight. And like I've joked around about this before. Like Porto will play some of the worst football imaginable, and they'll still find a way to get 85 points because that's what this team does. I mean, there are people that joke about it, like the raça da dragão. The raça is a Portuguese word that basically means like grit and just toughness, fighting tooth and nail to get a result. I think that he's somebody who definitely is able to who's able to get these players to fight for him and to fight for Football Club Porto. So I think that he's definitely somebody who, like I said, is kind of similarly to Simeone, is just so good at getting these players psyched up for a big match. Where they're coming into this match as the underdogs, and yeah, maybe they've got a big injury or a big suspension, but they're able to compete and to just win their physical duels. And I think that he's definitely a coach who, yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of things that I've been critical of him, for being kind of a sore loser a lot of times. I remember at the Super Cup just in August, about 2 months ago, where Porto got down to, we're losing 2-0 to Benfica, and they had a red card, and Conceição got a red, and he refused to leave for like 2 minutes until the captain Marcano persuaded him to leave. So he's somebody who is definitely a fiery personality. But with that being said, I don't think it's all just pregame speeches and getting players hyped. I think that love him or hate him, the fact is he's one of the best managers in Portugal.
Zach did have to go in quite the hurry, so I appreciate his time coming on the show. But you're with me to finish this one out as we, again, continue to finish previewing this Barcelona versus Porto match. Some of the other notes you need to know. So Nico Gonzalez, we didn't really talk about him at all. Zach didn't even mention his name, really, because he does play off the bench, which, judging on the 5 appearances in 8 matches and 268 minutes so far this season, it's possible that Barcelona will see him. But I don't think that you're going to see too much of Nico Gonzalez in a Barcelona uniform, just judging by at least the first month and a half of this sale, because with a 30 million euro buyback, it's not like he's on loan. It's a 30 million euro buyback. So obviously something will need to change for him at some point this season or beyond. But for Varela to also be signed and brought in and become the starter, and Nico not really see that time as a pivot, there are big questions on how Nico Gonzalez would fit in a Barcelona midfield under Xavi going forward. Also want to mention, too, the legacy of Porto in the Champions League. They won the whole dang thing with João Moreno in 2004. That was a long, long time ago, though, at least in football time. They actually won the European Cup, though, speaking of a long, long time ago, in 1986-87. And so they are 2-time winners of this quote-unquote competition, extending all the way back with different names. But as far as Porto fans enjoying the good old days before the transfer market going crazy with Chelsea in the mid-2000s, Real Madrid in 2009, Neymar, and Barca's big buys with Coutinho and Ousmane Dembele, it does feel like a different world that we are living in. But I also want to remind you again, Porto, they do have some Champions League pedigree. And as far as Barcelona's legacy with Porto as well, the man of the match in that 2004 final was none other than Barca's sporting director in Deco, who missed crossing over with former academy prospect from 2008 to 2015, João Felix, who went on to become a player of note for Benfica instead and broke some Porto hearts. So that's just one of those little minor storylines or anything, because getting into the Barcelona side of things, Zach did talk about the back line for Barcelona. And yeah, between Ronald Araujo, Jules Koundé, and Andres Christensen, I mean, you have as much of an idea as me. There is that game, start one, bench one, cut one, but the actual situation for Xavi is you have to start 2 and bench 1. And Araujo was rested against Sevilla on Friday, having just come back from injury and not looked fully fit against Mallorca. And I would assume he was rested against Sevilla to come in and play against Porto, but we'll have to see. And then Koundé has arguably been Barca's best player, at least top 3 this season. And Christensen has been the most consistent and best left back for Barca in a while. So, I mean, my gut says it's Koundé at left back and it's Ronald Araujo at right back. I think that's where Xavi's going to go with this. And with Christensen also having these nagging injuries to start this season, I think as Christensen, as I said, he's probably been the most consistent from game to game. Koundé has been the best, as in highest ceiling, but he has also been at his worst, worse than Christensen's worst, I think, this year too. And that's also a different nature of their jobs because Koundé usually does have to run with the better athlete or the quicker player of if they're playing 2 up top or whoever it may be. And then Christensen is the one who's a bit more reactive and does help support Balde there out on the left. So it is Koundé kind of right in the middle of the field having to deal with that first run on a counterattack. So Koundé is the one who does get exposed a little bit more, but it's also by the nature. He also, oddly enough, has not been dribbled past yet, though, either. So when I say exposed, I just mean that a counterattack is on and they get deeper position. And yeah, he's had 1 or 2 little things here or there this season, even playing the ball out of the back. But Koundé, as I said, consistently has probably been Barca's best defender this year. And then up in the attack, Lewandowski was rested last week, so he won't be rested again, I think, maybe until 2024. I say that tongue-in-cheek, but I kind of mean it. And then on the left with the midfield injuries, I think we can expect it's still going to be João Felix, even though his form has dipped a little bit since those 2 5-0s, obviously. But then that midfield, you know, it's funny. I did see Gabi and Fermin Lopez and Gundogan as the pivot, but I don't think that's where Xavi goes here with Fermin Lopez starting. I mean, obviously, Fermin Lopez, I think, is going to be coming off the bench. He's the only real midfield sub that they have at the moment. But I think that Xavi is going to start Romeo, Gundogan, and Gabi. I think that midfield pretty much picks itself with all the injuries. Then that front 3, the big question, I think, really is who starts on that right wing. Result-wise, even talent-wise, it is Lamine Yamal, who just re-signed that contract until 2026. But when he turns 18 in 2025, it's supposed to be an extension to 2030. So I throw a lot of numbers and extensions and things out there, but all you need to know is he is re-signed until 2026 with a €1 billion release clause. So he will not be going anywhere until he is at least 19 years old at FC Barcelona. So, yep, he will be on a contract to at least 19. But yeah, then the question is it him or is it Ferran Torres? I think, again, talent-wise, result-wise, it's Lamine Yamal. But just like Rafinha, I think the starter still to protect Lamine Yamal being 16 and physically having to take his time with him. And Xavi has warned Kool-Aids that is, you have to handle players with caution at that age. And I think that might be the right thing to do. So I still think Barcelona is talented enough. And Ferran Torres still on the wing does give you enough on that right wing to kind of, we'll say, survive in this one with the rest of the team kind of clicking and you try to pick your best 10 otherwise. And Lamine Yamal, just like Fermin Lopez, can come into this game and change it. And if, as Zach said, Porto does choose to give Barcelona the ball and play in almost a low block or a medium block by their standards and try to counterattack, I think Ferran Torres puts in a defensive shift for you. And, you survive, if you will, until if the game is something that needs to be rescued, Lamine Yamal and Fermin Lopez really do have the ability to unlock that game and change things around. So that's where I would go and how I would pick things with, not say that Ferran Torres is the starter, but you have Ferran Torres start that game. And I think Lamine Yamal can, against a Porto side, give you something off the bench. So again, Zach Lowy, I want to thank him for coming on the show. Some technical difficulties, as I mentioned, kind of prevented us from finishing out the show and doing the rest of it with him. But I appreciate everything he shared about FC Porto, which, as I said, feels like this is for the group in the Champions League because for Barcelona, it's away and you expect them to take care of business. Even though it's not the Camp Nou, it's Montjuic, it's Europe. You expect Barcelona to take care of business at home, but they still have work to do. They have demons that they have to exercise, and that's still work to be done. You can either follow Zach on his individual X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. That's in the show notes or down in the comment section below. Or you can follow him along with Breaking the Lines, which is his website that he started, which I produce a lot of terrific written content. Again, him and his team have done a lot of good work across all of football, not just Portuguese football, Barcelona stuff and the like sprinkled in there as well. So that's Breaking the Lines. And then we are on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at the Barcelona Pod, Patreon, the Barcelona Podcast, closest group, the Barcelona Podcast, answer the questions that let you in. And of course, a good rating on the podcast apps and subscribing to the YouTube channel. That is the biggest help that you can give me as that continues to push the show in front of as many people as humanly possible. Most importantly, thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. And Forza Barca.